So the example analysis section is going to be the next section of your paper. So again, this is just a section of your research paper. You're writing it on the same topic as you've written all your other papers on. So basic requirements, 500 words minimum. You can use sources if needed. Sources are optional for this one. If you don't want to use sources, you don't have to. If you would like to use sources, you can. It just depends on, what sort of example you're choosing, whether or not you decide to use sources. So, Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, don't do anything to your margins. MLA format with a works cited page. If you use sources, you'll have a rough draft of this that will be due on November 14th, okay, in class. So we'll be working on it in class, doing a read through. And again, because this is a section of your research paper, you do not need an introduction or a conclusion. You will choose an example that illustrates your topic or stance and interpret how the details of that example either demonstrates the urgency of your argument or helps you prove your point. So basically, you're choosing an example and talking about how it relates to your topic. So when choosing your example, make sure that it is specific and solid. Your example could be, for instance, a story using the experience of either yourself or others told in narrative form. That includes many relevant details, not just an overview, but the full story in all its detailed glory. So if you decide to use your own experiences as examples, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. I have had people ask in the past, like, I'm doing an interview. Can I use the interview to talk about, as the example? Sorry, my cat's meowing at me. What? Anyway, I would hold off on that simply because you're going to have a section of your paper that deals with your primary research, so your interviews or your surveys or your content analysis or whatever you're doing for that. So I would hold off on that and try just using a different example. Or you can use one interview. If you're doing multiple interviews, you can use one interview for the example, and then you'll put the others in your primary research section. You can also use art, any sort of art form, from paintings to poetry to music to movies to tattoos to internet memes. Just any sort of art form that's out there, that illustrates the cultural values that might be relevant to your argument. You can use a person or persona, using a particular person or their persona as an icon that demonstrates your argument. You can use cultural objects, so the use of an object to show the values of the culture that created it. So that could include art forms, but could also include, documents or articles or, you don't want to use the article as a source though, so be careful if you're going to use an article or something like that or a document. But, it could be anything. It doesn't even have to be an art form, like a piece of clothing or something like that could be a cultural object. Or an advertisement could be a cultural object. So, You can choose more than one example if you feel that a single example is insufficient, but I would recommend choosing examples as a group that demonstrates the same idea rather than using a series of disconnected examples. You can always include more examples later when you're putting your research paper together, but it just helps to have more of like a, for this section, you want your examples to all be sort of a unit that demonstrates one thing rather than like going in a bunch of different directions at once. And then you have to analyze your example. You can't just give your example and let it stand for itself. You have to analyze it, and basically what that means is you want to interpret how your example is relevant to what you're saying. So examples generally demonstrate either 1, how the example proves your point, or 2, how the example illustrates the problem, or 3, both. So, you want to show how it's relevant, basically, by interpreting what's there and talking about, like, okay, here's how this works within the larger frame of this issue that I'm talking about. You will therefore start to include your own observations, thoughts, opinions, and interpretations more than you have done in your other papers, okay? The structure of this particular section, you have 2 basic options for structure. The first is to start by describing your example in detail and then analyze the example to show relevance, or describe your example in detail, stopping occasionally in between specific parts of your example to occasionally analyze one or more details, okay? So you can analyze it as a whole or pick it apart and analyze the specific component parts, okay? It just kind of depends, the one you choose kind of just depends on what kind of example you're using, what you want to pull out from that example, and, what you want to say with that example. So just use what's going to work best for what you're trying to do. Sources, you can use a source to pull your example from or to help you analyze the example. One caution: if you use the source to help you analyze, do not let your source analyze for you. Use it only to add credibility to your own analysis or to add ideas to your own analysis. For instance, if your example were a Star Wars movie, you wouldn't want to go to StarWarsFanboy.com and just copy what they think about the movies. You would want to sit down, watch the movie yourself, come to your own conclusions, and then use StarWarsFanboy.com or a more credible source, hopefully, to add to your existing interpretation. Okay? So you want to come up with your own interpretation of how this is relevant first, and then you can bring in a source to add to that idea. That way you're starting from your own sense and then adding on. You can also use a source as your example, but again, just a note on that. Many times if you pull, for instance, an article that, like a news article or something that describes something that happened to somebody, often, if not always, that news source is going to put its own spin on it, okay? So you're not getting just the facts. I think it's been sufficiently proven by now that news is not objective, that they always put spin on what they're saying, that they always have a point of view, and even when that point of view is very slight, there are news sources that are more objective than others. the details that they put in and the details that they choose to omit, even that can change the way that the reader views what's going on. Even the words that they tend to choose. So, for instance, one news source might call something a protest and another might call it a riot. They both can be describing what's happening, but one has a negative connotation, one has a positive connotation, and that can skew the way that you view it secondhand. So if you're going to choose your example from a source, I would try to find sort of multiple viewpoints of that before moving forward. Okay? So, all right. Please let me know if you have any questions. Like I said, the rough draft of this is going to be due in class November 14th. The final draft is going to be due in class on November 21st, the next week. So that's it for the example analysis. I will see you guys in class.